The ring was my grandmother's. A thin gold band with a small sapphire set in the center. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive by anyone's standard. She had worn it every day for 51 years. When she passed, she slipped it off her own finger and pressed it into my palm. Not my mother's palm. Mine. That was 11 years ago. I was 22. I don't think about the ring much anymore. I think about what it meant that she chose me. My name is Claire Sutton. I grew up in Millhaven, a small town in central Ohio where everybody knew your last name before they knew your face. My grandmother, I called her Gran, had lived in the same white house on Sycamore Ridge Road for 43 years. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a vegetable garden she tended like it was sacred ground. That house was the only place I ever felt completely still inside. My mother left when I was 4. Not a dramatic leaving. No suitcase thrown, no door slammed. She just started being somewhere else more than she was home, and one morning, she was simply gone. Gran took me in without a conversation, without paperwork at first, without anyone asking if she was ready. She was 61 years old, and she made me a bowl of oatmeal and told me to sit down and eat. I want you to understand who she was before I tell you what happened after she died. Gran was not a soft woman. She didn't say, "I love you" easily or often. She showed it in other ways. The way she showed up to every single one of my cross-country meets even when her knees hurt. The way she kept a folder of every essay I ever wrote, even the bad ones. The way she always answered the phone on the first ring whenever I called from college, no matter what time it was. She wasn't sentimental. She was steady. And steady, I have learned, is rarer and more valuable than any softness. She had 2 children of her own, my uncle, my mother's older brother, whom I will call my uncle because that is what he was, even if he never acted like it, and my mother, who by the time Gran got sick had drifted back into our lives just enough to cause damage. Gran was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 3 years ago in the spring. She was 81. The doctors said she could have another year or 2 if she was careful, took her medications, didn't overdo it. She was careful. She took her medications. She still planted her tomatoes that April. My uncle called me a week after the diagnosis, not to ask how Gran was doing, to ask if she had updated her will. I told him I didn't know. He said she should. He said things needed to be sorted out properly. I asked him what he meant by that. He said, "You know what I mean, Claire." I did know. I just didn't want to believe it yet. Gran passed on a Tuesday in October. A quiet morning, her neighbor told me, the woman across the street who had been checking on her daily for 2 years, bringing casseroles and sitting with her while she watched her evening programs. Gran had eaten breakfast. She had fed the birds. She had gone back inside, sat in her chair, and simply didn't get up again. I drove 6 hours from Pittsburgh, where I'd been living and working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized engineering firm. I had taken 2 weeks of PTO without thinking twice. I walked into that house and it smelled like her lavender and dish soap and something underneath both of those that I will never be able to name. And I sat on the kitchen floor for about 15 minutes before I could stand up again. The funeral was 3 days later. My uncle came with his wife, my aunt by marriage, and their 2 adult sons, my cousins. My mother came too, which surprised me. She stood near the back of the church, dressed in black, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I had not seen her in 4 years. I did not speak to her. I wasn't ready for that conversation. I wasn't sure I would ever be. What I remember most about that day, more than the service, more than the flowers, more than the flowers, more than the pastor's words, is standing by Gran's grave afterward and hearing my cousin talking quietly to his brother. I wasn't meant to hear it. He didn't realize I was within earshot. "Mom said the house appraised at 280, he said, "plus whatever's in the accounts." His brother said something I couldn't catch. "Yeah, well, she's not blood, is she?" I walked away. I didn't say a word. I got in my car and I drove to the Comfort Inn off Route 62 and I sat on the edge of the bed in my funeral clothes and I stared at the wall until it was dark outside. She's not blood, is she? 11 years of Sunday dinners. 11 years of her ironing my interview clothes and quizzing me before exams over the phone and mailing me handwritten cards on every birthday because she didn't trust email for important things. 11 years of being her person, and I being hers. She's not blood. I found out about the will the following week when Gran's attorney, a quiet man named Mr. Ellison who had handled her affairs for 20 years, called to schedule a reading. He was careful on the phone, professional, measured, but something in his tone made me feel like he was preparing me for something. I arrived at his office on a Thursday morning. My uncle was already there when I walked in, seated across from Mr. Ellison's desk with my aunt beside him. My cousins weren't there. My mother was not there either. My uncle barely acknowledged me when I sat down. Mr. Ellison read the will. Gran had written it 8 years ago. 8 years ago, she had left the house to my uncle. The accounts, modest, around $40,000 in savings, split between him and my mother. There was a personal bequest to me, the ring, which I already had, and a small savings bond worth $1,200 that she had set aside years earlier. My uncle exhaled when Mr. Ellison finished, a long breath like he'd been holding it. I sat very still. Mr. Ellison looked at me over his glasses. "Miss Sutton," he said quietly, "I should mention that we received a document approximately 14 months ago that may be relevant." My uncle's posture changed. Immediately. Subtly, his shoulders shifted, his jaw tightened, but I noticed. Mr. Ellison explained. 14 months before she died, Gran had come to his office alone. She had brought with her a handwritten amendment to her will, not a formal codicil, but a signed, witnessed letter expressing her clear intent to revise the distribution of her estate. The letter stated in her own words that she wished to leave the house on Sycamore Ridge Road to me. It was signed by her and witnessed by two people, her neighbor from across the street and a woman from her church. My uncle said it wasn't valid. He said it very calmly, which is how I knew he had expected it. "A handwritten letter is not a legal instrument," he said. "The will stands as written." Mr. Ellison said that was a matter for the court to decide. My uncle looked at me for the first time since I'd sat down. He said, "Claire, don't make this harder than it needs to be. You have your ring. You have the bond. Gran loved you. But the house has been in this family for 40 years. I said, "I know. She left it to me." He shook his head slowly, like I was a child being stubborn about something I didn't understand. I understood everything. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed, because I think people sometimes skip over this part when they tell stories like this. They jump from the injustice to the triumph and leave out the middle, which is where the real thing happens. The middle is where I lay awake in my hotel room doing math on my phone at 2 in the morning, calculating what it would cost to hire an attorney, wondering if it was worth it, wondering if Gran had really understood what that letter meant legally, whether she had meant for me to fight for it or to simply know that she had wanted it for me, wondering whether wanting it, needing to prove that I had mattered to her in a way that her own children hadn't protected, made me selfish or human. I called my friend Joanna, who I had known since college, who was now a paralegal in Columbus. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the rarest and most loving things a person can do. When I finished, she said, "Okay. First, this is worth fighting. Second, I know someone." The someone was a woman named Ruth Callahan, an estate attorney in Columbus with 30 years of experience and a reputation, Joanna told me, for taking cases that other people gave up on. I called her the next morning. She met with me for 2 hours. She asked questions I hadn't expected, not just about the letter and the will, but about my relationship with Gran, about the nature of the bequest, about the witnesses. She was precise and methodical, and at no point did she tell me what I wanted to hear just to make me feel better. At the end of the meeting, she leaned back in her chair and said, "This is not unwinnable. But I want you to understand what it will cost you, not just financially. It will take time. It will be uncomfortable. And if your uncle decides to make it ugly, it will get ugly." I said, "He's already made it ugly." She nodded. "Then let's get to work." My uncle hired his own attorney, a firm out of Columbus that handled commercial litigation, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this. He also, I later learned, reached out to my mother. Whether he was looking for her support or her silence, I'm not sure. What I know is that she called me one evening, about 3 weeks into the process. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She said she was sorry. About Gran. About everything. She said she knew she hadn't been there for me, that she was aware of what she had cost me, that she had been working on herself. She said she hoped I knew that Gran loved me. She said she didn't want to see the family torn apart over a house. I listened. I was quiet for a long time when she finished. Then I said, "I'm not the one tearing anything apart." She didn't have an answer for that. The hearing was set for February, 4 months after Gran's death. I drove back to Millhaven the night before and stayed at the same Comfort Inn. I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark and thought about Gran's kitchen, the yellow curtains she'd had for 20 years, the ceramic rooster on the counter that she'd bought at a yard sale, and always meant to get rid of but never did. I thought about sitting at her table on Thursday evenings eating soup and doing crossword puzzles together. I thought about how she had never once in all those years made me feel like a guest in her home. Ruth had prepared me thoroughly. We had gone through every document, every piece of correspondence, every detail of the witnessed letter. She had deposed Gran's neighbor, a woman in her 70s named Bet, who had sat in Gran's living room and watched her sign that letter and had not wavered once in her account of it. She had also located a second witness, a woman from Gran's church named Dorothy, who had driven 40 minutes to be deposed, and who said, very simply, Vera knew exactly what she was doing. She always knew exactly what she was doing. Vera was Gran's name. I don't think I've said that until now. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the particular silence of a room where things are decided. My uncle sat on the other side of the aisle with his attorney and his wife. He was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He did not look at me. I was wearing a gray blazer Gran had helped me pick out years ago when I was interviewing for my first real job. I don't know why I chose it. It felt right. Ruth presented our case methodically, the way she did everything. She established the timeline, Gran's declining health, her visit to Mr. Dolly, Allison's office, the deliberate and witnessed act of putting her wishes in writing, the two women who had been present and who had testified to her clear state of mind. She presented a letter Gran had written to me, separate from the amendment, found in a box of documents Gran had organized before her death, in which she explained, in plain language, why she wanted me to have the house. She had written it like a conversation, like she was sitting across from me at her kitchen table. I did not cry when Ruth read it. I had cried when I first read it alone in Mr. Ellison's office, with the door closed. I had used up that crying then. In the courtroom, I sat straight, and I breathed, and I listened to her voice. Gran's voice, through her words, "Fill the room." My uncle's attorney argued that the handwritten letter had no legal standing, that the formal will was the binding document, that any claims to the contrary were sentimental but not legally actionable. He used the word sentimental more than once. Each time he did, something in me went very quiet, not angry, just settled. The judge asked questions, specific ones, about the witnessing, about Gran's cognitive state, about the timeline of the amendment relative to the original will. Ruth answered each one directly. My uncle's attorney objected twice. The judge overruled him both times. Then the judge asked if I wanted to speak. I hadn't prepared a statement. Ruth had told me I could, but that I didn't have to. I had gone back and forth about it for weeks. I stood up. I said that I wasn't there to argue about legal instruments or estate law. I said those were Ruth's domain and I trusted her to handle them. I said I only wanted to say one thing, that my grandmother had raised me from the age of 4, that she had shown up for me every single day for 22 years, that she had pressed that ring into my hand before she died, not because it was worth anything, but because she wanted me to know that I was hers, and that the house on Sycamore Ridge Road was the only home I had ever known that felt like it was mine too. Not because she owed it to me, because she wanted to give it to me, and I believed it was my responsibility. not just my right to honor what she had wanted. I sat down. The room was quiet. My uncle was looking at the table in front of him. The judge took 3 days to issue his ruling. I was back in Pittsburgh when Ruth called. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee I had not touched, watching it go cold. My phone buzzed and I saw her name and I sat very still for one full second before I answered. She said, "Claire, we won." The judge had ruled that the handwritten amendment, properly witnessed and consistent with Gran's established intent, constituted sufficient evidence to revise the distribution of the estate. The house on Sycamore Ridge Road was mine. I put the phone down on the table. I didn't say anything for a while. I don't think I could have. What I felt was not triumph. I want to be precise about this because I think it matters. It wasn't the feeling I'd imagined when I let myself imagine winning. Not the rush, not the vindication, not the hot satisfaction of having been proven right. What I felt was something quieter, like a door that had been stuck finally swinging open on its own, like the ending of something that had been suspended for a very long time. I thought about Gran, about the fact that she had known the dynamics of her own children well enough to go to an attorney's office alone, 14 months before she died, and put her wishes in writing and have 2 women witness it. She had prepared for this. She had fought for me before I even knew there was a fight. That's the part that broke me, finally. Not the winning. That she had protected me while she still could. My uncle did not call. My aunt sent a brief email saying they were disappointed and that they hoped I would consider the family going forward. I read it once and did not respond. My mother called 2 days after the ruling. She said she was glad it had worked out. She said Gran had always loved me most, she thought. She said it without bitterness. At least, that's how it sounded. I thanked her for calling. We didn't speak long. I don't know what our relationship will look like from here. I think that's a question for another time. Bet, the neighbor who had witnessed Gran's letter, brought me a lasagna the first weekend I came back to the house. We sat on the wraparound porch, and she told me stories about Gran that I hadn't known. About the years before I came along, about who Gran had been as a younger woman. Stubborn and funny and fiercely private. I could have listened for hours. Maybe I did. By the time Bet went home, the sun had gone down and I hadn't turned any lights on yet, and I sat there in the dark on Gran's porch and listened to the neighborhood go quiet. The yellow curtains are still in the kitchen. The ceramic rooster is still on the kencher. I have not moved anything yet. I'm not sure I'm ready to. Not because I want to leave it as a museum. I understand she is gone. I have made my peace with that, or I am making it. But because I'm still learning which parts of this house are hers and which parts are mine, and I don't want to rush that. The ring is on my finger. It fits perfectly, which always surprised me because Gran's hands were smaller than mine. She knew it would fit. I think she must have known. I don't tell this story because I want sympathy. I'm 33 years old and I own a house and I have a job I'm good at and people in my life who showed up when it counted. I am fine. I am more than fine. I tell it because someone is going to read this or hear this, and they are going to be sitting with their own version of it, their own letter that nobody wants to honor, their own room where they didn't belong and then did, their own person who loved them in all the ways that don't show up neatly on a document. And I want them to know that the fight is worth having, not because you're guaranteed to win, but because the act of refusing to let it go quietly is its own kind of answer. Gran didn't raise me to disappear. I learned that. Eventually, I learned that all the way down. I've thought a lot about what my uncle said at that graveside. Not to me, he didn't say it to me. He said it to his son in a low voice, the way people speak when they think no one important is listening. She's not blood, is she? What I keep coming back to is this. He was not entirely wrong about the facts. I am not blood. I never was. But he drew the wrong conclusion from the right information, and that gap between what is technically true and what actually matters is where the whole thing fell apart for him. Gran knew the difference. She had known it for years. That's why she went to Mr. Ellison's office alone 14 months before she died and signed that letter in front of 2 witnesses. She didn't do it out of sentimentality. She did it out of clarity. She had watched her own son for decades and she understood exactly what he was capable of, and she prepared accordingly. That is not luck. That is wisdom. The kind that comes from paying attention to people over time, from refusing to let affection cloud your judgment about who someone actually is. I think about my own choices during those months differently now than I did when I was inside them. At the time, the decision to hire Ruth and fight the case felt like desperation as much as anything else. I wasn't sure I deserved to win. I wasn't sure the letter would hold. I wasn't sure I wasn't just a grieving 20-something who couldn't let go. But I've come to understand that the doubt was not a sign I was wrong. It was a sign I was being honest with myself. People who are completely certain they deserve something, who feel no hesitation at all. I have learned to watch those people carefully. What I did was not complicated. I told the truth. I showed up. I found people who were willing to stand in a room and confirm what they had seen. Bet drove to that deposition herself, in her 70s, without being asked twice. Dorothy came 40 minutes each way. They didn't do it for me exactly. They did it because Gran had been real to them, and because the truth was real, and because some people still understand that those things are worth a little inconvenience. My uncle lost not because the law was against him. At first it wasn't. But because he built his case on the assumption that I would accept the story he was telling, that I was not really family, that I would take the ring and the bond and be quietly grateful and go back to Pittsburgh. He miscalculated what Gran had built in me over 22 years of Thursday soup and first-ring phone calls and a folder of every essay I ever wrote. She had built someone who knew her own worth, not arrogantly, just accurately. That's the thing I want to say if I'm being direct about it, not the legal outcome. Not even the house. The thing that changed me was understanding that the most important work Gran ever did wasn't putting my name in a letter. It was raising me to be someone who would not disappear when someone told me to. She spent 22 years on that. It held. You don't always get the house, but you do get to decide whether you walk away without a fight. And in my experience, the decision to stand up, even when you're not sure you'll win, even when it costs you money and sleep and the last threads of a family you already half lost, that decision has a way of becoming who you are. Long after the courtroom, long after the courtroom, long after the ruling, long after the lasagna and the porch and the neighborhood going quiet, Gran didn't raise me to disappear. I think that's the whole story, honestly. Everything else is just detail.